Let's go to some breaking news now. Israel's Defense Force has confirmed it launched an attack on the entrance to the Syrian military's headquarters in the capital, Damascus. It is the third day in a row that Israel has launched strikes on Syrian government forces. For more on this, we're joined by our Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran in Jerusalem. Matthew, good to have you with us today. What can you tell us about the latest on these Israeli strikes in Syria?
Girish, good evening to you. This news coming through in the last hour or so that Israel has launched a strike within the heart of Damascus, the Syrian capital, focusing on the entrance way to the Syrian military headquarters. We do need to stress that we're not talking about a full-scale strike on that compound, but this does appear to be something more of a warning to Syrian forces that Israel is prepared to launch these strikes, not only in the south of the country, which is where Israel has been focusing its offensive in the last few days, but right in the heart of Damascus as well. It follows a number of days of strikes, 2 days of strikes by Israeli forces focused on Syrian government forces heading towards the southern city of Sawlani in Syria. That is an area which had been embroiled in sectarian violence since the weekend. Local Bedouin clans clashing with the militia from the local Druze community. And the Syrian government had dispatched its forces, deployed its forces down to that area, but that was something which Israel did not like. And it had started to attack troops, it started to attack tanks that were heading towards Sawlani, and now we are at this situation where for a third day these strikes have continued, this time focusing in and around Damascus. We've heard from Syrian state media that there were loud explosions heard in the Syrian capital, and that came just before this confirmation from the IDF. Israel's Defense Minister, Israel Katz, had promised that Israel would continue these strikes. Why it is happening is because Israel says it is trying to protect the interests of that Druze community, a religious minority which lives primarily in Syria, but there is also a Druze community in Israel as well, and Israel is saying that it is trying to protect its interests. But we also know that there has been widespread criticism of Israel's actions within Syria, not only in these last couple of days, but ever since Israeli troops and tanks poured in over the border into Syria in the hours after the former Syrian regime was toppled, the dictator Bashar al-Assad toppled by rebel forces, now replaced in government by the leader of those former rebel forces, Ahmed al-Shara. Israel moved in, it started launching strikes, it put troops and tanks into Syrian territory. That was widely criticised as an opportunistic land grab, as overreach, and those criticisms do continue now.
And Matt, what's been the reaction within the Israeli Druze community?
We've seen, just in the last hour or so, scenes from up in the northern part of the Golan Heights. This is an area which Israel seized from Syria during the 1967 Six-Day War. It annexed that land back in 1981. It is not recognised around the world as Israeli territory. Countries like Australia see it as being Israeli-controlled and occupied, although the US does recognise it as sovereign territory there. The reason I'm giving you that background is to explain that this is the area where the Druze community live in Israel, and there is an area along the border which is colloquially known as the Shouting Fence. It runs along the side of a Druze town known as Majd al-Shams. The Shouting Fence because members of that community used to stand at the fence line and shout to their relatives over the other side decades ago. We've seen hundreds of people gathering at that fence line this morning, some trying to push over parts of the fence line. People have been able to run into Syrian territory, the IDF trying to turn them around and bring them back. Less of a threat to Israel, you would have to say, than people coming from Syria into Israel, but there are some quite tense scenes there, and it appears that members of the Israeli Druze community are trying to get involved here because they are trying to convince Israeli authorities to go further. They have this connection with the Druze community in Syria, and that's why they're acting in this way. So that's a developing situation up in the northern Golan Heights there, which we'll continue to monitor throughout the evening.
In the meantime, there have been yet more deaths at an aid site in Gaza. What is the latest on the incidents from today?
We learned this morning local time that there had been this stampede, as it's been described, at a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution site in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. GHF, which is this private aid organisation backed by the US and Israeli governments, says that when the aid was being distributed at this site, that there were so-called agitators within the crowd, whipping them into a frenzy as they were already desperate to get their hands on whatever food they could from that site, and that this stampede has ensued. 19 people trampled, one person stabbed in that incident, and GHF is accusing Hamas of being behind it, trying to sow this sense of chaos in the area, although it hasn't presented any evidence to back up that claim. This is one of two sites that GHF was running in Gaza yesterday, one in Khan Yunis, one in the Saudi district of Gaza, and that really goes to the heart of some of the criticism about GHF, that it is being given sole responsibility effectively to distribute aid within Gaza, but it is running far too few of these distribution sites, that people are having to trek for hours on foot to access some of these facilities to get their hands on this food, and that is adding to the level of desperation there. The UN has described these sites as death traps there. So an incredibly sad situation there, but also adding to this sense of chaos at these aid distribution sites. In recent weeks, hundreds of people, the UN is saying 800, more than 800 people have been killed as a result of shooting attacks at these sites. And that's something that the GHF has been disputing there as well, saying that they are Hamas figures and should not be trusted.
So as this desperate and deadly situations continue, Israeli politicians and defense officials are debating the government's plan to build a camp for Palestinians in Gaza. It's getting a lot of opposition within and outside Israel, isn't it?
It certainly is. This idea, which has been put forward by the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz, labelling it as a humanitarian city which would be built on the ruins of the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Many observers in this space are describing it as more of a concentration camp style approach, where Palestinians, hundreds of thousands of them, would be moved into this camp but wouldn't necessarily be allowed to leave. The debate is quite interesting because there is, of course, this discussion about the merits of such a proposal, the humanitarian factor here, and that continues to rage not only in Israel but around the world. Primarily here in Israel, though, the debate among politicians is how viable this sort of plan is. Could it be established quickly enough? How much would it cost? There are differing accounts as to the time frame they could develop this camp, whether it would be in the course of millions, hundreds of millions of shekels of US dollars, or would it be more in the even higher than that? And the proponents of this sort of scheme are saying it is viable, it should go ahead, while the detractors are saying that this is just a proposal which has been floated there. It's never actually going to get off the ground, and it's more aimed at trying to frustrate the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, which are still ongoing as well.
Okay, Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.